Much ado about COVID vaccines. G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. As those of you who are familiar with my channel will be well aware, I get a lot of my information by reading the weekly New Scientist magazine. It's an Australian edition. It's compiled in Great Britain and then it's printed in Australia, and they have an Australian sub-editor or something like that. Anyway, my local newsagent hangs on to it for me, keeps it in a drawer. So when I go there on a Monday, I'm able to pick it up without fail. I have accumulated quite a stack. And this is just the current stuff. There's boxes of the things elsewhere. And as those of you who are familiar with my channel will also be aware, I describe myself as a time expired registered general nurse. Time expired indicates that my authority to practice has expired. In 1998, they wanted $150 to renew my authority to practice for another, 3 years or something, might have been 2 years. And at the time I was unemployed. And at the time I had not worked in the industry for 12 years, during which time the industry had A, become computerized, and B, it had become flooded by an influx of college-trained nurses who were computerized. And I just couldn't see anybody giving me a job in the field, apart from the fact that the reason I got out of the field was because of nurses' back. I had to quit nursing. Couldn't do it anymore. Lifted one fat old lady too many. But, happily, as I pointed out, I am informed about new developments by New Scientist. And on the 14th of August, they put out a special feature concerning vaccines. It is not a short feature. However, it is highly informative. Therefore, if you would like to know as much as I have had the chance to try to know, then buckle in, sit down, get yourself a coffee or a beer or whatever your favourite beverage is, and I will share with you what I've been able to read. And I'll be hand-holding the camera while reading at the same time. So if the image sort of drifts off to one side or t'other, try not to be too bothered. Pay attention to what I'm saying. What we know so far. More than half a year into the mission to vaccinate the world against COVID-19, we are beginning to get a picture of how well the leading vaccines are working. We have never before had anything like a COVID-19 vaccine. Developed in record time, we now have an armoury of different jabs to help us tackle the coronavirus. Their speedy rollout means we are receiving them before any longer-term data can confirm how effective they are at preventing infection, transmission, illness and death. That information is now rolling in. While it is largely encouraging, we are only starting to get a glimpse at how long each vaccine offers protection, whether booster shots will be needed, and how well the jabs are holding up against the newer variants of the coronavirus. From efficacy to preventing long COVID over the next 7 pages, we examine what we now know about the leading vaccines and how many more are yet to come. Oxford AstraZeneca, widely used in the UK, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is effective at preventing deaths and hospitalisations. Disclaimer, I have been vaccinated first shot with Oxford AstraZeneca. And here's a shot of the blurb they give you. And my second shot is due on Thursday the 7th of next month. Question, how does it work? A chimpanzee cold adenovirus has been genetically altered so it can no longer reproduce and has had a gene added that encodes the coronavirus's spike protein. When injected, the virus is taken up by immune cells, which then make the spike protein and, quote, display it, unquote, to other immune cells, triggering an immune response. Question, where is it made? Most UK stock is made by AstraZeneca facilities in the UK, though the vaccine is also manufactured in 14 other countries, including Australia. The UK has used about 5 million doses from the Serum Institute of India, but exports stopped when COVID-19 surged in India earlier this year. Question: are the UK and Indian versions of the vaccine different? They are identical, but a few people in the UK who got the Indian-made version have had their COVID-19 vaccine passports rejected by some European countries such as Malta, Cyprus and Portugal. That is because the European Medicines Agency is still considering AstraZeneca's request to approve the Serum Institute of India as a manufacturing site. The Indian-made version has batch numbers 4120Z001, 4120Z002 and 4120Z003, which can be found on UK vaccination cards or via the National Health Service app. Doesn't mean much to me in Australia, but it's in the article, so you get to hear about it. Question: where has it been approved? It has various forms of approval in 121 nations, including the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and those in the European Union. How many doses have been distributed so far? More than 1 billion doses have been manufactured. That answer doesn't actually answer the question. Are there side effects? All vaccines can cause a sore arm and issues including fever, fatigue, dizziness and headache. The Oxford AstraZeneca one has also been found to rarely cause a blood clotting syndrome called vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT. This tends to occur more often in younger people. It is estimated to happen after 1 in 100,000 doses in people aged 50 and over, but after 1 in 50,000 doses in people between 18 and 49. Because of this, some countries, including the UK, are limiting the vaccine's use in younger age groups. To my knowledge, at the moment in Australia, 7 million doses of Oxford AstraZeneca have been administered. 7 people have died from the vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. 1 in a million chances of dying. If you're under 50, you've got 1 in 50,000 chances of getting a blood clot. If you get a blood clot, there are some pretty good treatments available for blood clots. We know how to heal people after blood clots, but still some people die. The main point is, getting a blood clot as a side effect of a vaccine is not as bad as getting the disease and having 200 times the chances of getting a blood clot from the disease. So, well, you vote with your feet, don't you? I'm 60. When I got the vaccine, they were thinking about making it available to people under 60, and 60 was kind of like the youngest possible age that you were able to get it in Australia. I put my name down straight away, had to wait 2 months, 2.5 months to get a dose of it. Personally, I would say you can get the vaccine and be more or less assured of not becoming severely ill and almost guaranteed of not dying if and when you contact the virus, or you can not get the vaccine and you can take your chances with the virus. Here and now in Australia, we've had some days where we've run 1,200 cases, 1,400 new cases per day in New South Wales. The virus takes 2 or 3 weeks to either kill you or you're going to recover from it. So to establish a case death rate, you take today's death rate, go back 3 weeks. So the day we had 12 deaths, 3 weeks before that, we'd only had something like 450 new cases. New South Wales was running sort of 2 to 3% case death rate. The original Wuhan variety, when it got to Italy and Spain, because they had no treatments, no idea what to do with it, it was spreading like wildfire, they were getting 12 and 15% case death rates. If your health system becomes overwhelmed, if you've got bed block in the ICU and you can't get into hospital, getting COVID is a very, very risky proposition. You might find that only 85% of people are going to recover on their own at home if they've got no treatment available. But there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time worrying about the side effects. Back to the article. How effective is it? Figures from Public Health England suggest it is 75 to 99% effective at reducing deaths from COVID-19 after 2 doses. Having 2 shots reduces the number of people who need to go to hospital because of the virus by between 80 and 99%, and cuts the number who have an infection by 65 to 90%. 1 dose is estimated to reduce transmission by 35 to 50%, but there are no figures yet on how much it reduces transmission after 2 doses. However, all these figures date from a time when the main coronavirus variant in the UK was Alpha, formerly known as the Kent variant. How long does immunity last? Answer: we don't know yet, but the UK is considering offering booster vaccinations from September to vulnerable groups and people aged 50 or over. How effective is it against variants? 2 doses seem to be 67% effective at reducing cases of symptomatic disease caused by the Delta variant, originally spotted in India. That compares with 75% effectiveness against the Alpha variant, but only 10% against the Beta variant, which was first seen in South Africa. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? What's going on is the virus is being subject to selective evolutionary pressure, and it is mutating. And the virus which survives an encounter with a vaccinated human immune system is the one which replicates and gets back out into the community, which is a worry, because it means that all of the vaccines will gradually become less effective as the mutated variants, the more successful viruses, are reintroduced to the community, particularly by people who think that, oh, I'm vaccinated, so I don't need to wear a mask. Oh, I'm vaccinated, I don't have to bother about social distancing. They are the people who are the human ambulatory breeder reactors who are wittingly or unwittingly, carelessly or recklessly ensuring that the virus is able to continue to mutate and spread. Doesn't much matter if the virus mutates and you don't take it and give it to somebody else. If the virus mutates and then dies out in you because you're locked yourself away, that's okay. You haven't given it to your neighbours, you haven't given it to your family, you haven't given it to your friends. If you can keep the virus on the inside of your mask, then you have done your duty to humanity. You have helped to prevent the virus from continuing to spread. You've helped prevent the virus from continuing to become better at defeating the best vaccines that we can come up with. And at the moment, sad to say, the virus is mutating faster than humanity is vaccinating. Moving on to the next candidate, Pfizer-BioNTech. Somebody should have had a bit of a chat with the people who started the company Pfizer and decided to use that as a brand name, because in the English-speaking word, a fizzer is a term for something that doesn't bloody work. You light a firecracker and you throw it and it fails to go bang, that's what's called a fizzer. Generally because you retrieve the failed firework, cut it 3/4 the way through at the halfway mark, bend it, expose the black powder from the inside, and then light it with a match. And it goes fizz. Shoots out a little bit of a jet of flame, 2 or 3, 5 inches long. And if you're not careful, that jet of flame will flambe your own fingernail. I remember doing it when I was about 6 or 7. That's what a fizzer is. So sticking a P in front of the word fizzer was not the greatest idea for a brand name for a pharmaceutical company. it implies that your product doesn't work. But, nobody consulted me. It's a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation. I guess they've got around that by marketing to people who didn't play with fireworks in an English-speaking nation. Pfizer BioNTech, a third dose of this mRNA vaccine, is being rolled out as a booster shot for the over 60s in Israel. How does it work? The vaccine uses messenger RNA, bracket mRNA, to make the body produce a protein from the coronavirus and prime your immune system to fight off the real thing. Where is it made? The manufacturing process involves multiple sites, but most doses are distributed from sites in Kalamazoo in Michigan and Puurs in Belgium, Puurs. Where has it been approved? It has forms of approval in 97 countries so far, including the US and the UK, which was the first country in the world to authorise it. How many doses have been distributed so far? Quote, hundreds of millions of doses, unquote, according to Pfizer. Are there side effects? The most common is pain at the injection site, followed by fatigue and headache. More serious side effects, like severe allergic reactions or heart inflammation, bracket myocarditis, have been reported but are extremely rare. From other sources like Radio National Health Report and different New Scientist articles, the myocarditis applies to young men, and the one that this article doesn't mention is Bell's palsy, which is having a drooped eye and a drooped mouth on one side of your face. And that happens at exactly the same rate for Pfizer as a side effect, as does the blood clots or vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombopenia or thrombolytic thrombocytopenia with the Oxford AstraZeneca. So people who are saying, oh, I don't want an Oxford AstraZeneca because I'm scared of a blood clot, they're sadly unaware of the fact that by waiting for the Pfizer, not only are they giving themselves a better chance of catching the virus while unprotected, they're also, when they get the Pfizer, they're subject to an equal risk that the AstraZeneca recipients are for getting a blood clot. The Pfizer recipients are at the same risk of getting Bell's palsy. We had a case in Australia where one of the New South Wales state government ministers went up there in a press conference with the premier of the state, and one eye was drooped. And at the end of the conference, people came at him on Facebook and said, go to your doctor and find out what's going on. Yes, he had Bell's palsy from his Pfizer vaccine. So people who think that Pfizer is the latest, greatest, and you got to wait for 3 or 4 months for a Pfizer rather than getting an Oxford AstraZeneca now, I think you are behaving in a delusional fashion. That may be a harsh way of putting it, but I still think it's what's going on. Get a vaccine, get it in your arm, and then you're probably not going to die from the bloody disease. Worrying about the side effects doesn't really make sense. It's a disproportionate amount of worry over something that doesn't often happen. Yeah, it'd be bad if it happened to you, but not as bad as catching the actual coronavirus. How effective is Pfizer? Pfizer's initial analysis in 2020 found that it was 95% effective at preventing symptomatic disease. There is less information on asymptomatic cases, but one study found that the vaccine cut these by about a third in those over 60. A real-world study in June found that it is 89% effective at preventing hospitalisation and 100% effective at preventing the need for admission to an intensive care unit. 2 studies from Israel released in July found that 2 doses of the vaccine were 80 to 88% effective against infection and 41 to 79% effective at cutting transmission. The latter range is uncertain because so few vaccinated people infected others, so the sample size was small. How long does immunity last? The vaccine is still strongly effective at preventing disease 6 months after the second dose, but the efficacy does slowly decline, according to a preliminary Pfizer study, in the first 2 months after the second dose. Efficacy against the disease was 96%, but by 4 to 6 months, it had fallen to 84%. The study ended before the Delta variant had become so dominant. How effective is it against variants? The vaccine held up well against the Alpha variant, but we know less about its performance against Delta. One UK study from July suggested that one dose was 31% effective against symptoms caused by Delta, and 2 doses were 88% effective. Preliminary research from Israel's Ministry of Health suggests the vaccine is also less able to prevent transmission of Delta. The country has begun giving a 3rd shot as a booster to people aged over 60. According to a Pfizer busyness report, there is evidence that a 3rd dose given at least 6 months after the 2nd can boost antibodies against the Delta variant at least 5-fold, says Michael Marshall. Okay, now we have this colour-coded graph. Now, green means high confidence, comprehensive evidence from multiple studies. Baby shit yellow, medium confidence, evidence with a moderate level of uncertainty from a limited number of studies. Low confidence, limited evidence and inconclusive results. Okay, Pfizer-BioNTech, 1 dose. Symptoms, 55 to 70%. Hospitalisation, 75% to 85%. Death, 70 to 80%. Infection, medium confidence, 55 to 70%. Transmission, low confidence, 45 to 50%. Okay, 2 doses. Prevent symptoms, 85 to 95% high confidence. Prevent hospitalisation, medium confidence, 90 to 99%. Prevent death, medium confidence, 95 to 99%. Prevent infection, 70 to 90%. And that's low confidence. Transmission, no data. Moving down to the Oxford of the AstraZeneca. Prevent symptoms, 50 to 70%. Exactly the same as Pfizer. High confidence. Hospitalisation, high confidence, prevents 75 to 85% of hospitalisation. Excuse me. Preventing death, 75 to 85%. Medium confidence, whereas Pfizer has the 70 to 85% high confidence. Preventing infection, 55 to 70% medium confidence. Preventing transmission, 35 to 50%. 2 doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca. Prevent symptoms, 70 to 85% of times. Prevent hospitalisation, medium confidence. No, low confidence. That preventing symptoms was a medium. Preventing hospitalisation, low confidence, 80 to 99%. Prevent death, low confidence, 75 to 99%. Prevent infection, 65% to 90%, low confidence. Prevent transmission, no data. So there's a few things to mention about that. This is 14th of August and we're now on the 8th of September. So we're talking 3 weeks old data, and it was probably several weeks old before it was compiled and put into print. What we seem to be finding in Australia is parallel to what they're finding in the United States, which is that almost nobody who shows up in intensive care with COVID-19 has had 2 vaccine doses. There are a few, but the ones who are showing up have got multiple other underlying health issues, and they're really, really old. I think we've had 2 or 3 people who were double vaccinated who've died. However, I've heard that in Belgium, they had 20 cases of people who were double vaccinated who died of the Delta variant. As I said, the virus is undergoing evolutionary pressure, and therefore it is mutating to get better at dealing with our vaccines. Below that, it's not dealing with the vaccines, it's dealing with a vaccine-augmented human immune system. Now we have a bit of a look at Moderna. The protective effect of this mRNA vaccine against the original variant still looks strong 6 months later. How does it work? Like the Pfizer-BioNTech jab, the Moderna vaccine uses messenger RNA that prompts the body to produce a protein from the coronavirus that then primes the immune system. Where's it made? At a plant in Norwood, Massachusetts. Where has it been approved? It has various forms of approval in 64 countries. How many doses have been distributed so far? Moderna's initial agreement with the US government was for 100 million doses. The firm expects to supply 800 million to 1 billion doses globally in 2021 and up to 3 billion in 2022. Are there side effects? The vast majority are mild and short-lived, such as headache, nausea, and swelling of the underarm glands on the side that was injected. Heart inflammation or myocarditis occurs very rarely. How effective is it? Moderna's initial analysis released in November 2020 found that 2 doses were 95% effective against symptomatic disease. This is backed by an analysis of real-world data co-authored by Venki Sundararajan, co-founder of Variance, an AI biomedical startup in Massachusetts, published in June. It found that the vaccine was 93% effective against infection, whether symptomatic or asymptomatic. Moderna's initial analysis found that the vaccine was 100% effective against severe disease, while Sundararajan's study found it was 86% effective against hospitalisation and 100% effective against admission to an intensive care unit. The World Health Organization says it isn't clear if the vaccine prevents transmission. However, a recent study by Mark Lipich and Rebecca Kahn at Harvard University concluded it does. They estimated that 1 dose of the Moderna vaccine reduces the potential for transmission by at least 61%. How long does immunity last? A study published in April found that antibody levels remained high 6 months after vaccination. That same month, Moderna announced that effectiveness against symptomatic disease stayed above 90% after a jab. It doesn't say after which jab. This suggests that the protective effect does not decline much in the first 6 months. How effective is it against variants? Moderna released a preliminary study in June addressing this question. There was no difference in antibody levels produced against the alpha variant and the original virus. I've got to say that somebody should grab a hold of whoever it was that decided to call the Kent variant in England the alpha and take them outside and enlarge the diameter of their rectum by the size of a size 10 army boot. Anybody with half a fucking brain should surely see that the original Wuhan variant should be called the alpha because that was the first one. Everything else should be labelled sequentially after that. But oh no, somebody in Britain decided that Wuhan was Wuhan, and what happened? Oh, we found a new one. We'll call it the alpha. Confusing, stupefying. Just, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Anyway, it's what they've done. The alpha variant is not the first version of COVID-19. The first version was the one that appeared in Kent, and there have been 2 variants between the Wuhan variant and the Kent variant, which the English decided they wanted to call the alpha. And then everything else has been labelled afterwards. Why? Why? You know, the beta is in South Africa, the gamma is in South America, the delta is in India. Now there's, I think, an epsilon that's appearing in South Africa, and it's, from what I've heard, the epsilon in South Africa is proof against all the vaccines. We will see. Anyway, enough of that sidetrack. Back to the article. How effective is it against variants? Moderna released a preliminary study in June addressing this question. There was no difference in antibody levels produced against the alpha variant and the original virus. However, the beta, delta, and gamma variants did show reductions. Levels were 2.1 times lower for delta, a drop the company describes as, quote, modest. Will a booster shot be necessary? It is distinctly possible, and Moderna is preparing to roll out such shots. It has developed a booster that targets the beta variant, which shows some evidence of escaping immunity. In a preliminary study posted in May, the company found that antibody levels against beta were low in people vaccinated 6 months earlier, but that the booster brought levels back up to the original post-vaccine peak. Again, Michael Marshall. The ones that got away. A few coronavirus vaccines have fallen by the wayside, but not many. Of a total of 135 candidates, just 5 have been abandoned. Given that around 3/4 of experimental vaccines usually fail, that might seem very low. But there is still time for more to fail. None of the vaccines have secured full regulatory approval in the US or UK yet. 3 of the failures, I think Pfizer and Oxford AstraZeneca have received the approval by now in the US. 3 of the failures involved a technology called replicating viral vector, (RVV), which uses a live replicating virus unrelated to the SARS-CoV-2 virus to deliver the SARS-CoV-2 genes. All proved disappointing results in early trials. None of the 21 approved vaccines are based on this technology, so it is tempting to view it as a failure, but it has succeeded with other diseases, and there are 8 coronavirus RVV vaccines still in clinical trials. One of the other failures from Imperial College London used a novel self-amplifying mRNA technology. Progress simply proved too slow. The other one, a protein subunit vaccine from the University of Queensland, Australia, also tried and failed to push the technology envelope. One of its components was a protein derived from HIV that helped to stabilise the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, but this unexpectedly caused some volunteers to record false positive tests for HIV. Why would it be unexpected when they got the bloody component derived from an HIV? Which could interfere with legitimate results from such tests. From Graham Lawton. Johnson & Johnson. More than 13 million people in the US have received this vaccine, which only requires a single shot. How does it work? The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is similar to the Oxford AstraZeneca one in using a harmless adenovirus that has been tweaked so it can no longer reproduce. But the Johnson & Johnson one involves a human virus, not a chimpanzee one. The virus has been given a gene that encodes the coronavirus's spike protein, which prompts our immune cells to make the protein and trigger an immune response. Where is it made? The Netherlands and the US. Where has it been approved? It has various forms of approval in 59 countries, including the UK and the US. How many doses have been distributed so far? The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, estimates that more than 13 million doses have been given in the US. Why do you only need 1 dose? Johnson & Johnson tested this vaccine, giving just 1 dose in its final stage clinical trials because the initial small trials suggested that this gave a strong enough immune response. The firm also has a trial ongoing testing 2 doses given 8 weeks apart, an approach that is likely to raise the immune response still further and make it last longer. Are there side effects? The vaccine has been found to rarely cause the same blood clotting syndrome called vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia, or VITT, as the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. In the US, 28 such cases of VITT were identified after nearly 9 million doses had been given. The CDC paused the use of the vaccine in April as a result, but allowed it to restart after 10 days. How effective is it? There is less real-world data available for this vaccine than for several of the others, but its large clinical trial published in April found that it reduced cases of moderate to severe infections by 66% and reduced severe disease by 85%. There were no hospitalisations or deaths of people vaccinated with this stuff during the trial. How long does immunity last? It isn't yet known how long immunity lasts. How effective is it against variants? A study published in July suggests that people who have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine generate lower levels of antibodies against the Delta variant than people who have the Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna vaccines, The study authors say a second dose of Johnson & Johnson vaccine may be beneficial. From Claire Wilson. Do vaccines affect long COVID? Being vaccinated reduces your chance of getting long COVID, which can involve a variety of symptoms that persist for weeks or months after an infection with the coronavirus. The benefits of vaccination in reducing the risk of getting long COVID can be seen even if people get infected after having a shot. There is also evidence that vaccines reduce the severity of the symptoms in most people who already have long COVID, but in a minority, their symptoms worsen. While various studies are getting underway, so far there's almost no published evidence on the relationship between long COVID and vaccination. Quote, "We do not yet know to what extent COVID-19 vaccination can prevent long COVID," end quote, says Annika Yodick at the University of Oxford, whose team will use data from the UK's National Health Services to try to answer this question. A team at King's College London has released initial findings from an ongoing study in which people report any long COVID symptoms via an app. According to a study under leader Tim Spector, vaccination reduces the risk of getting long COVID by a factor of 20. This is mainly because vaccination reduces the risk of being infected in the first place by a factor of 10, and the risk is also halved in those who get infected despite being vaccinated, says Spector. For those who already have long COVID, it seems vaccination can be helpful. In a survey of 900 people who were vaccinated after having symptoms lasting for at least 4 weeks, and in most cases more than 3 months, around 60% reported an overall improvement in their symptoms. A quarter reported no difference, and 20% reported worsened symptoms. Bracket SSRN digital doi.org/GQRW close bracket. Quote, "Ours is the largest study and probably the best evidence to date," says Ondine Sherwood at Long COVID SOS, a UK organisation that campaigns for support for people with long COVID. Of the 3 vaccines that Sherwood and her colleagues assessed, the Moderna one was the most beneficial, reducing the average symptom severity score by 31%. For Pfizer-BioNTech, it was 24% and 23% for Oxford AstraZeneca. Sherwood and her team want to do a follow-up to see how long the symptoms last and what the impact of a second dose is. However, a randomised trial rather than a survey would provide more reliable results. The different effects of vaccination on long COVID make sense, given emerging evidence that there are many different mechanisms that can cause long COVID. It can be due, for instance, to persistent infections in some parts of the body, to tissue damage from past infection, to disruption of the immune system, or can arise from all of these occurring in one person. Vaccines would be expected to help clear persistent infections, but to make no difference to the tissue damage. They might even worsen immune disruption in some cases. Vaccinations worldwide. Just 29% of the world's population has received at least 1 dose of the coronavirus vaccine. In the little pie chart, 14.8% fully vaccinated, 14.2% single vaccinated, 71% unvaccinated. Covaxin, approved for emergency use in India, Covaxin uses a weakened form of the coronavirus itself. Once upon a time, back in the 1950s, when poliomyelitis was a scourge ravaging the United States and the Western world as well, there was a great keenness to become vaccinated. There was a lot of government money floating around to set up vaccine production facilities. Somebody in America, I forget the exact details, they came up with a dead virus vaccine for polio, and they failed to kill the virus quite sufficiently. I don't know whether it was 700 or 7,000 children were given polio by the vaccine. It was back in the 1950s, and that was a time when miraculous modern medical science wasn't quite as bloody miraculous or scientific as they thought it was. So to me personally, the idea of using a killed virus vaccine it still sounds pretty iffy, but that's perhaps why the Indians have only approved it for emergency use. How does it work? CoVaccin is an inactive vaccine comprising the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, but in an altered form that can't replicate. Let's hope they got that right. When the vaccine is injected into the body, the immune system learns to recognise the virus. Where is it made? It's produced by Bharat Biotech in India. Where has it been approved? India approved emergency use of Covaxin in January. 8 other countries have given it various forms of approval, but the US Food and Drug Administration says there is insufficient information for it to grant approval. The World Health Organization is expected to make a decision soon. How many doses have been distributed so far? The exact numbers are unclear, but fewer have been distributed than had been hoped. The Indian government says it anticipates receiving 400 million doses between August and December this year, but Bharat Biotech has so far delivered only 16 million shots, missing its target of 80 million jabs between January and July. Are there side effects? For several days, there may be a few side effects of Covaxin, including fever, headaches, irritability, and pain or swelling on the injected arm. How effective is it? According to Bharat Biotech, Phase 3 trial data shows that Covaxin has 93% efficacy against severe illness. Overall vaccine effectiveness against symptomatic infections is 78% and 64% for asymptomatic infections. How long does immunity last? It isn't known yet how long the body's immune response to Covaxin lasts. How effective is it against variants? Blood serum analysis by the US National Institutes of Health suggests that Covaxin stimulates antibodies that are effective against the alpha variant. However, some research suggests that Covaxin stimulates about 2.7 times fewer neutralizing antibodies against the Delta variant and 3 times fewer against the Beta variant. Similarly, the vaccine is reportedly effective against the highly infectious Delta Plus variant, the Delta Plus, which is different to the Delta, but with weaker immune response to this variant. So it's reportedly effective, but with a weaker immune response. So it kind of works, sort of, maybe, we hope. Will a booster shot be necessary? We don't know yet. Bharat Biotech is conducting trials on booster shots and is due to release the first results in August. It is possible that booster jabs may be needed annually to keep antibody levels high enough to protect people. So says Dalmat Singh Chalwa. And now we move on to Sputnik 5. The Russian vaccine is similar to the Oxford, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, but with a twist. How does it work? The Sputnik 5 vaccine uses tweaked adenoviruses like the Oxford, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines, but unlike in the others, the inactivated viruses used to deliver dose 1 and dose 2 of Sputnik 5 are slightly different, which theoretically makes the immune response it provokes stronger. Where's it made? The vaccine was developed by a team at the Gamaleya National Center of Epidemiology and Microbiology in Moscow with funding from RDIF, Russia's sovereign wealth fund. It is manufactured in Russia by pharma companies part owned by RDIF and also under license in 14 other countries. Where has it been approved? It is available in 69 countries with a combined population of 3.8 billion, mostly on an emergency use basis. The vast majority of these are low-income countries. There is also Sputnik Light, which is just the first dose for use in places with acute outbreaks in need of rapid vaccination. This is approved in 12 countries. How many doses have been distributed so far? According to database company Statista, Russia has exported more than 600 million doses, 250 million of them to India, and a further 3.3 billion doses have been manufactured abroad under license. Are there side effects? The vaccine is well tolerated. Just over half of people given both doses had mild side effects such as a headache, flu-like illness and sore arms. RDIF has said that real-world findings from Serbia and San Marino show the vaccine is extremely safe. How effective is it? RDIF has claimed it has the, quote, most efficient COVID-19 vaccine in the world, unquote, citing non-peer-reviewed numbers from Russia and the United Arab Emirates that a double dose is almost 98% effective against infection and 100% effective against severe disease. Not peer-reviewed studies out of Russia and Saudi Arabia. Who wants to believe that? Just saying. If it's real, get it peer-reviewed, huh? Get some credibility. Get it peer-reviewed. When Vladimir Putin says you got to believe me, that makes it doubtful. 98% effective against infection and 100% effective against severe disease. In February, a peer-reviewed analysis in The Lancet of interim phase 3 trials results reported 92% efficacy against infection and 100% efficacy against moderate or severe disease, both from the day of dose 2 onwards. The first dose alone is administered as Sputnik Light, is 79% effective at preventing infection, according to the Lancet paper. An independent study has confirmed that it stimulates the body to produce antibodies. So it does do something. How long does immunity last? There is no data on duration, but it has been reported that Sputnik Light will also be used as a booster 6 months after the second shot. How effective is it against variants? Very effective, according to research done at the Gamaleya Centre and published in the journal Vaccines. This found that it neutralises the alpha, beta, delta and gamma variants. However, a very small study in Argentina found that it was effective against alpha, but less so against beta, says Graham Lawton. Then we move on to China's coronavirus vaccines. 3 key Chinese vaccines are in use outside of China, particularly in low-income countries, but their efficacy varies. In terms of sheer numbers, the leading Chinese vaccine is the snappily named BBIBP CoViD. Did you get that? BBIBP CoViD. From Beijing-based pharmaceutical firm Sinopharm and the Beijing Institute of Biological Products. This is an inactivated virus vaccine that uses viruses originally isolated from COVID-19 patients in China. These are grown in cell culture and then killed, in scare quotes, then, quote, killed, unquote, by soaking them in a chemical called beta-propiolactone. This vaccine is approved in some form in 59 countries, mostly low-income ones, and also has emergency use listing from the World Health Organization, which means it can be used under COVAX, the global initiative for equitable vaccine sharing. Information from Sinopharm is thin on the ground, but World Health Organization says that all the vaccines on the emergency use list are, quote, highly effective in preventing severe disease and hospitalization due to COVID-19. WHO approval is also an endorsement of safety. Peer-reviewed results of a phase 3 trial showed that the vaccine is 78% effective against symptomatic disease. The World Health Organization concluded that the Sinopharm coronavirus vaccine is 79% effective against hospitalization. The vaccine seems to be effective against the alpha coronavirus variant, but less so against the beta variant. Peer-reviewed data on its effect on the gamma and delta variants has yet to emerge. The World Health Organization says there is also no information available on whether it prevents transmission. Another inactivated virus vaccine from China, CoronaVac, from Sinovac Biotech, has some form of approval in 39 countries, mostly low-income ones, and has World Health Organization emergency use listing. Efficacy of this vaccine varies a lot from trial to trial, with a high of 84% against the symptomatic disease in a trial in Turkey and a low of just over 50% in Brazil. The World Health Organization's emergency use listing assessment concluded that the vaccine is 51% effective at preventing symptomatic disease, but 100% effective against severe disease and hospitalization. Effectiveness against variants also varies. Effectiveness against variants also varies. Some research suggests the Sinovac vaccine works well against the alpha variant, but less so against beta, and is ineffective against gamma. However, the World Health Organization says it is effective against Gamma. There is no data on its efficacy against Delta. The World Health Organization also says there is no information available on whether it prevents transmission. A third Chinese vaccine, AD5-nCoV from CanSino Biologics, is approved in 8 countries but not by the World Health Organization. It uses an adenovirus as a parcel to deliver the DNA for the coronavirus spike protein into the body, given as a single dose. Results from a trial in Pakistan suggest that 66% effectiveness. 3 other Chinese vaccines are being used exclusively in China, and one is in use in China and Uzbekistan. One of these vaccines was also developed by Sinopharm in partnership with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It is essentially identical to BBIBP CoViD and just as effective, but used a different SARS-CoV-2 sample as its starting point, says Graham Lawton. Oh joy, more in the pipeline. Several further coronavirus vaccines are in late-stage testing, according to McGill University's vaccine tracker. There are 130 coronavirus vaccines still in clinical trials, 40 of them in phase 3. In the UK, those most likely to see the light of day are made by Novavax, Valneva and CureVac. The UK government has options to buy batches of all 3 pending approval. Novavax's shot consists of spike proteins from the SARS-CoV-2 virus embedded in a virus-like nanoparticle. Interim results from phase 3 trials suggest it's about 90% effective at preventing disease with the original coronavirus strain, but less effective with variants. Novavax is tweaking the vaccine to deal with them. Valneva's vaccine is an inactivated virus vaccine, the only one of its kind in development in Europe. It is in a phase 3 trial in the UK with results expected in September. CureVac's jab is an mRNA vaccine, but results from its phase 3 trials so far have been disappointing, with only 48% efficacy against infection. Other late-stage vaccines worth watching are from the Canadian firm Medicago, which grows vaccines in a relative of the tobacco plant, as well as a viral protein vaccine from pharma giants Sanofi and GlaxoSmithKline. Initial results on the latter disappointed and trials were halted, but it has been reformulated and is showing promise in phase 3 trials, says Graham Lawton. Children aged 12 to 17 queuing for vaccination in China. That was 14th of August's New Scientist. And as I said, we have much ado about coronavirus vaccines. Here's 6 more magazines worth with stuff about coronavirus. 31st of July, the variant race is upon us. Back in March, an eventual end to the coronavirus pandemic appeared to be in sight. The number of COVID-19 cases were plummeting in the UK and the US as vaccination levels rose. It seemed the same might gradually happen in country after country around the world. But then India was hit by a devastating second wave due largely to a new variant now known as Delta. After Delta spread to many other countries, case numbers soared once again, including in the UK and US. The question is, will this keep happening? Will more dangerous variants keep evolving, causing fresh waves of infections around the world despite vaccine rollouts? The answer is almost certainly yes. Variants will continue to arise, there's no doubt, says Ravi Gupta at the University of Cambridge. The SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus mutates relatively slowly compared with some similar viruses. Because of this, there were hopes early in the pandemic that the virus wouldn't change much and that the pandemic would come to a swift end as people acquired immunity through infection or vaccination. And that's the line that the business as usual subcommittee of the Chamber of the Horrors of Commerce have been trumpeting, bellowing, screaming from the hills, screaming from the treetops to the hills, desperate for people to just forget about coronavirus and say that again, screaming for people to forget about the coronavirus and reopen the economy. I don't think it's a valid plan to go forward because the virus doesn't give a shit about the economy. Arr. It is now clear that those hopes are forlorn. SARS-CoV-2 has been evolving right from the start. Most mutations either make no difference to the virus's behaviour or are harmful to the virus, and so the viruses carrying them die out. But in March 2020, a mutation called D614G appeared that is now thought to make the virus 50% more infectious. Although it was never given a specific name, it rapidly became the predominant variant. In September 2020, a variant with 23 mutations compared with the original virus was detected in the UK. Alpha, as it is now known, is around 50% more transmissible than D614G, and it also spread around the world. Now we have Delta, which is about 50% more transmissible again and can also evade immunity to some extent, like the Beta and Gamma variants, two other variants of concern. Higher infectiousness is the most worrying trait that the virus can evolve because it makes it much harder to control. A more transmissible virus will kill more people, even if it is no more virulent or deadly, because it will infect more individuals. Higher transmissibility also means a higher proportion of the population needs to be immune to achieve herd immunity threshold, which is perhaps now as high as 90%, compared with around 70% for the original virus. Here in Australia, our politicians are fixated on the idea that once we reach 70% of the eligible population being double vaccinated, then they can reopen the economy. And the politicians and the Chamber of Commerce don't want to pay attention to the fact that those figures were only tentative, hopeful, optimistic, and they only really applied to either Alpha or the original Wuhan variant. In the real world, other things are happening entirely. What's more, infectiousness is often linked to immune evasion. If a virus replicates faster, says Gupta, it takes more antibodies to mop up all the viruses, which means an immune response that works against earlier variants could be overwhelmed. The good news is there's a limit to how much more transmissible the virus can become. Quote, I think at some point transmissibility will plateau. The virus won't keep getting more transmissible forever, says Jesse Bloom at the University of Washington in Seattle. However, that might take many years or even decades. Quote, I'd be cautious about saying that we are nearing its limit. We don't know where that is, says Gupta. At the moment, the virus is basically saying there is no end to this. Some have suggested that there is also a limit to how the coronavirus can evolve to evade immunity. The most effective antibodies bind to the parts of the outer spike protein of the virus that help it infect cells, so it is thought that these parts cannot change much if the virus is to remain able to do this. The bad news is that new work by Bloom suggests that this belief is wrong, and there is no limit to how far the virus can mutate to escape antibodies. Quote, I expect this kind of change to continue forever, he says. Until this work, it wasn't clear whether the pre-existing human coronaviruses that are one of the causes of the common cold persist in people because our immunity to them is short-lived or because they keep evolving to evade our immunity. By analysing blood samples from as long ago as the 1980s, Bloom's team has now shown that their persistence is due to the continual emergence of so-called escape variants. If SARS-CoV-2 evolves like these other human coronaviruses, it will continue to acquire mutations that enable it to escape the recognition of antibodies, says Bloom. Quote, I don't expect any real end to this process, unquote. Other viruses, such as flu, never run out of ways to dodge our immunity, he says. Evolutionary pressure. Not only may there be no limit, there is also growing evolutionary pressure favouring the emergence of further escape variants. For a virus to evolve, two key things need to happen. The virus has to mutate inside a body, and that mutant virus has to spread to other bodies. If a person with no immunity to the coronavirus breathes in a lot of the virus, it can readily replicate in the upper airway. A virus with a mutation that boosts infectiousness, such as D614G, can have an advantage. It will replicate faster than the original virus and will have a better chance of being passed on to other people. However, mutations that the that help the virus dodge antibodies won't provide any advantage because that person doesn't yet have the antibodies to the coronavirus. There is only a brief window when antibody production kicks in where antibody evasion provides any advantage. That's starting to get into the realm of gobbledygook. What's going on here and now is that the Delta variant, which is the one that's causing the problems, it appears that 12 to 24 hours after you encounter the virus, you commence shedding virus. The amount of virus you shed reaches its peak 36 hours after you meet and encounter the virus. You remain asymptomatic for 5 days. So 36 hours, that's a day and a half. 3 to 5 days means that even if you're going to later on get really sick and die, you're going to be maximally infective, maximally contagious for a couple of days, maybe 3 days on average, before you even notice it. If you've had a couple of doses of the vaccine and you encounter and become infected by the virus, you've got a 40% chance of being asymptomatic. The original virus, you had a 20% chance of being asymptomatic even without a vaccine. So what this means is that there's a great big gap between the virus starting to replicate and jump back out of your body and infect other people, and even the symptomatic patients recognizing that they've got a problem and going off to get tested. They're saying that every day somebody who's got the Delta variant is probably going to infect about 5 other people. They're saying that the average person who becomes infected with the Delta variant, 3 or 4 days, 5 people a day, they're going to infect about 18 people. And we're still running into a situation where when they get tested positive, roughly half the people in Australia who are being picked up have been in the community, not self-isolating because they weren't aware that they had the virus. And like it all up, there's a bunch of people who don't take self-isolation and masking seriously. There's a bunch of people whose attitude is, oh, the government says we've got to do this, and this. I think I can spot a loophole there, and there, so I'm going to do what I want to do regardless. Then there are the people who don't believe in the virus, then there are the people who don't believe in the vaccines, and the people who don't believe in masks. So I don't think you can reasonably expect that we're going to get any kind of a good handle on this anytime soon. And of course, this is a 2-page article. I'm pretty sure you don't want me to read the entire, 3-page article, because page 4 is on climate change. That's a different existential threat. Put that aside and move on to the next one, which is from the 24th of July, New Scientist. How do we live with COVID-19? I don't think I can be a safe member of society when we have 100,000 cases a day. What will 100,000 cases a day mean? Will life feel normal? What about vulnerable groups? What will winters look like? How many deaths are acceptable? There is some evidence that infection with other viruses can make COVID-19 symptoms a lot worse. Will there be an epidemic of long COVID? Long COVID is a good reason to immunise teenagers. It could affect education and studying. What will life be like for children? Students will no longer need to wear face masks in England because they're betting on vaccination. What new tech can we expect? What about new treatments? 80% reductions in infections in intensive care staff using a novel new nasal spray. Will we live in fear of dangerous variants? Clubs in England are now open for the first time since March 2020. What's the end game? The COVID-19 pandemic will one day be history, we hope, but the virus that caused it will not. Just as the 1918 influenza virus is still with us, we still have to learn to live with the SARS-CoV-2 and its descendants, says Neil Ferguson at the Imperial College London. But what form that relationship will take is unknown. According to Emilio Talenti at Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California, we are currently in a transition period as vaccines wrestle the pandemic under control. After this, he says, we won't eliminate the virus, but it will become endemic, meaning it's a constant presence that ebbs and flows over years or decades. Once this happens, broadly speaking, there are three scenarios, he says. The worst case is a future with waves of severe disease like the deadly flu outbreaks of 1928-29 and 1934-36, both of which were caused by descendants of the 1918-19 flu virus. This scenario could occur if global vaccination rates remain too low, immunity does not persist, or the virus mutates so it can evade the immune response or becomes more virulent. While global vaccination rates are too low, immunity apparently does not persist, and the virus does in fact mutate so it can evade the immune response. So, all right, all three of those scenarios are going on. The second and most likely, or most hopeful, or hopefully most likely scenario, he says, is that SARS-CoV-2 turns into a seasonal virus like flu, but that could still mean intermittent epidemic peaks as with flu. The best case scenario is that the virus fades away to become just another seasonal coronavirus like the four that cause the common cold. Ferguson agrees that the middle scenario is more likely, with low levels of infection and flare-ups where the level of immunity decline. It will become a classic endemic respiratory disease which we manage, probably through vaccination, he says, but that wouldn't entail any return to pandemic restrictions, says Graham Medley at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. We don't put special measures in to deal with the flu, and in the same way, I don't think we'll have special measures in to deal with the coronavirus. I wonder which Chamber of Commerce paid him to say that. What do you reckon? Little bird? Hey, little bird? Sitting close? Listening carefully, are we? 7th of August 2021. Chinese vaccines get boosted. A growing number of countries that have been depending on vaccines developed in China are losing faith that these alone can rein in the coronavirus as they face continued surges in infections and the spread of the more transmissible Delta variant. On 1 August, Cambodia became the latest nation to approve the use of a different vaccine as a booster shot. It will administer the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as a third dose to bolster immune protection for those who've already received 2 doses of Sinovac or Sinopharm vaccines. In the past month, Bahrain, Indonesia, Thailand, Uruguay and the United Arab Emirates have all begun mixing and maxing vaccines in a tactic known as heterologous vaccination, in the hope of improving protection and stemming transmission. Although China's 2 leading vaccines have gained emergency approval from the World Health Organization, not much Phase 3 trial data has been made public for either. The jabs from Sinopharm and Sinovac Biotech both use inactivated virus particles to provoke an immune response. This is a more traditional approach than the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccines, but has yielded worse results. Studies of the Sinovac vaccine have produced disparate findings. A study of healthcare workers in Brazil in January found that it was just 50% effective at preventing symptomatic cases of COVID-19, well below the 94% reported for the Moderna vaccine and 95% for the Pfizer-BioNTech jab. Trials in Indonesia and Turkey, however, found that it was 65% and 91% effective, respectively. The Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines are a lifeline for many countries in Africa, Central and South America, and Southeast Asia that have been beaten to supplies of other vaccines by richer nations. Together, the 2 vaccines are being used in more than 100 countries, but there has been disappointment with the efficacy of these vaccines, which may be even lower against Delta variant. Figures on this are yet to be published, but in July, Israel's health ministry reported that the efficacy of the Pfizer-BioNTech jab against Delta infection may be as low as 39%, although other studies have shown better results. I would not be surprised if Sinopharm and Sinovac's efficacy is as low as 30%, or even less against Delta, says Jindong Yan, a virologist at the University of Hong Kong. Sinovac has since recommended that a third dose of its vaccine be administered to boost protection following a study which found that antibodies declined to below the level obtained from natural infection 6 months after a second dose. So 6 months after being vaccinated with Sinovac, you've got less immunity from the virus than you would have if you had caught the bloody virus and got over it by yourself. That's a bit of a worry, isn't it, little bird? Meanwhile, some countries in Southeast Asia and Central and South America are continuing to face large outbreaks despite much of their population being double vaccinated. Chile locked down for over a month on the 12th of June to stem a deadly surge in cases after having given both doses to 47.3% of Chileans and a single dose to 61%. Like Uruguay, also a regional leader in vaccination efforts that has faced large outbreaks, about 3/4 of shots administered there have been Sinovac vaccine. In Indonesia, where Delta variant is driving a record spike in deaths, 131 healthcare workers have died from COVID-19 since June, according to the independent data group Lapor COVID-19. Most were vaccinated with the Sinovac shot. Indonesia is now rolling out Moderna shots to healthcare workers as a booster. There are concerns that Chinese shots may be failing at home too. Outbreaks emerged in Guangzhou in June and in July in Nanjing. More than 57% of China's population has been fully vaccinated. The country is reportedly considering using mRNA boosters. However, the Chinese vaccines remain a crucial line of defence against the pandemic worldwide. They might not be as effective at reducing transmission, but the Chinese vaccines continue to prevent hospitalisation and death, says Mauricio Nogueira, a virologist at the FMERP Medical School in San Jose do Rio Preto, Brazil. COVID-19 mortalities in Uruguay were reduced by as much as 97% with Sinovac vaccines. And in an experiment in Sarana, a city of 45,000 in Brazil, deaths decreased by 95% when residents were inoculated with Sinovac. We need Chinese vaccines to keep saving lives, says Nogueira. Heterologous vaccination is likely to become the most effective solution, he says, but for now, Chinese vaccines are vital for countries like Brazil, where only 19% of the population is fully vaccinated. When the global dearth of vaccines turns into a glut, aspirations should be raised, though, says Dong Yan. If we actually want to bring an end to the pandemic, to offer better protection and eradicate the virus from the human population, then we need better vaccines, he says. And the reality is, we can do better. We already have better vaccines. Same magazine. Regarding the myocarditis, it's more likely after infection than after vaccination. 450 cases of myocarditis per million COVID-19 cases in young males. Heart inflammation triggered by some COVID-19 vaccines has been a concern, especially in younger people, but a preliminary study suggests that in those most affected, it is 6 times more likely to occur after a coronavirus infection than after vaccination. In the past few months, some cases of this condition, known as myocarditis, have been recorded following the use of the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines. This has prompted concern, particularly in the US and Israel, as these two countries have led the way in vaccinating younger people. The reaction happens most often in men and boys aged under 30 after their second dose and is usually seen within 10 days, says Alma Jacob at Imperial College London, but many health bodies around the world say the benefits of vaccination still outweigh the risks for most people. Now a study in the US analysed how often myocarditis occurs following infection with the coronavirus. Researchers analysed the records of healthcare organisations that cover a fifth of the US population. They found that during the first 12 months of the pandemic, males aged 12 to 17 were most likely to develop myocarditis within 3 months of catching COVID-19 at a rate of about 450 cases per million infections. This compares with 67 cases of myocarditis per million males of the same age following their second dose of Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna vaccine, according to the figures from the US Advisory Committee on Immunisation Practices. Researchers added together cases after the first and second doses to reach a total rate of 77 cases per million in this male age group triggered by vaccination, a sixth of that seen after infection. I'm going to say case closed on myocarditis, just like case closed on vaccine-induced thrombopenic thrombocytopenia. You're still better off having the vaccine than you are having the disease. 21 August, Australia's Delta wave. The country's strict COVID-19 measures haven't been enough to stop the extremely contagious variant, reports Alice Klein. In Sydney, the pandemic feels like it is just getting started. The city is battling its worst COVID-19 outbreak yet, which is being blamed on the highly contagious Delta coronavirus variant and low vaccination rates. Since early in the pandemic, Australia has tried to keep the coronavirus out altogether by banning international visitors, quarantining all Australians returning from overseas, and rapidly locking down wherever COVID-19 is detected in the community. Except in Sydney, where sad-ass, glad-ass Berry Jickley Ann, she decided that, oh no, we don't need to lock down in Sydney because we've got such marvellous contact tracing. We don't need to lock down. Oh, no, lockdowns. Oh, no. The economy matters more. Yeah, so she waited till she had 20 new cases a day before she locked down. I think yesterday there were 1,280 cases a day. We have seen as many as 1,500 cases a day 3 or 4 days ago. Sad ass, glad ass of the Berejiklian tribe, you have made a thundering mess of this. I sentence you to kick yourself in the arse until your nose bleeds or your kneecaps fail from heel kicking yourself at every step. This worked for a long period. For example, in the first half of 2021, the country didn't record a single death from locally acquired COVID-19. Then the Delta variant arrived. A Sydney limousine driver who transported international aircrew was infected in mid-June, prompting stay-at-home orders to be introduced across Greater Sydney on the 26th of June. 14 days gap. The lockdown there is now in its 8th week. People can only leave home for reasons like buying food and essential work, but COVID-19 cases and deaths are climbing. Over 400 COVID-19 cases are now being recorded daily in Sydney. Well, it's now 3 times that. And the rest of the state of New South Wales. 8 deaths from the virus were recorded in the state on 15th of August. I think there's over 100 have died in the new wave so far. Its highest daily toll of the pandemic so far. In addition, the virus, we have seen one day where there was 12. In addition, the virus has started to spread to other Australian states and territories because of dickheads who won't pay attention to the stay-at-home orders. There are several reasons why case numbers aren't going down at this time, even though the same strategies that successfully contained the previous outbreaks have been deployed, say experts. One is greater transmissibility of the Delta variant, says Catherine Bennett at Deakin University in Melbourne. Now, if the virus gets into a household, everyone gets infected. Whereas last year, probably only a third of people would, she says. The extreme contagiousness of the Delta variant was highlighted when 45 people who out of 50, 45 of 50 people who attended a funeral in Sydney that breached the 10-person limit were infected with the virus. The shorter incubation time of the Delta variant is also making it harder for contact tracers to identify and isolate potentially infectious people before they can pass the virus on, says Bennett. Finally, the virus has found its way into parts of Sydney that are home to high concentrations of people who are unable to work from home, says Angela Webster at the University of Sydney. They are doing caring work, warehouse work, cleaning, driving, things that are absolutely essential, she says. The virus is spreading through workplaces, households and supermarkets in these areas, but, quote, you can't stop people doing essential work, living together or buying food, unquote, says Webster. Since it is looking unlikely that Sydney will be able to contain this outbreak with lockdown measures alone, it is, quote, now a race to vaccinate, unquote, says Webster. Only 26% of people aged over 16 in Australia are fully vaccinated. As of at the moment, that might be closer to 40%. Australian government modelling suggests that lockdowns will no longer be necessary when 80% of the adults are fully vaccinated, a target it hopes to hit by the end of the year. Webster believes people in Sydney probably won't be able to socialise in large groups or go to restaurants until next year. Quote, everyone here is very doom and gloom, unquote, she says. Quote, but we are averting thousands of deaths with this lockdown and we know the vaccine will end it. She says, I would amend that to say, we hope that vaccination will end it. Meanwhile, New Zealand, which has also used strict measures to largely keep the virus under control there, brought in a nationwide 3-day lockdown on Tuesday following the detection of one new COVID-19 case in Auckland. Yeah, Jacinda Ardern, she understands. She's not silly. She knows what she's doing. Do you understand? Do you get me, little bird? Yeah, are you paying attention, little bird? And then in the same magazine, we have a 3-page article on ventilation. And this little chart down here is pretty interesting. Outdoors, highest reading in parts per million, which is carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. They're saying 413. I'm pretty sure the planet's running 417 parts per million at the moment, but maybe this is taken in England. In a bus, on the upper deck, half full with the windows open, 741 parts per million of carbon dioxide, which we're using as a proxy to give us an idea of how many people are breathing the air. Because when you breathe out the carbon dioxide, and you can count the carbon dioxide in the air. And if it should be 413 parts per million and it's 714, it means that the air's been breathed in and out at least once. Lower deck, full with the doors opening at bus stops, 724. Funny that. Lower concentration on the bottom deck with the bus full and the doors opening than on the top deck with half full and the windows open. Maybe opening and closing the doors changes the air better than just having the windows open. London Tube. Platform between trains, 783. Platform after train departs, 419. Empty carriage with open windows, 542. Half full carriage with open windows, 976. Full carriage, standing room only, 1,076 parts per million. Overground train, doors open and then closed. Doors open 413, doors closed 720. Private car, 2 people, windows closed, 1,740 parts per million. 2 people, recirculating air conditioning on, 1,589 parts per million. 2 people, windows open, 413. 2 people, non-recirculating ventilation on, that means your air conditioner sucks in fresh air and blows it into the car, 413. Supermarket, large, empty, 413 parts per million. Supermarket, small, busy, 1,100. Restaurant, busy by the open door, 739. Office of new scientist, less than half full, 477. In a pub, main bar, full, doors and windows open, 420. Well, that's kind of interesting. Wouldn't tolerate our children drinking dirty water, but we seem to tolerate dirty air. Basically, large chunks of architecture are going to be tossed out the window because architects design to control the temperature for comfort rather than the atmosphere for infection control. So huge percentages of the human built environment turning out not to be safe to breathe inside. Isn't that a worry, little bird? Isn't that a worry? It bloody worries me. So from the same magazine, herd immunity to COVID-19 may not be attainable in the UK. A high vaccination rate will save many lives, but it probably won't be enough to stop COVID-19 becoming a seasonal disease. 79% efficacy of vaccines against symptomatic Delta infection. Final paragraph of this page article. This all points in one direction. Nobody should be banking on herd immunity. Quote, everybody should have the vaccine, says Van Schaik. Quote, nobody can rely on the herd for absolute protection against an illness that is potentially deadly and can have long-term health consequences. From the 28th of August. Do COVID passports work? Vaccine passes are becoming part of life, but questions remain over their effectiveness and ethics. More and more countries are moving towards requiring a form of COVID pass for international travel or attending large events or nightclubs, bars and restaurants. Their introduction is provoking protests in countries including France and Italy, however. So what are COVID passes? How effective are they? And are they ethical? What is a COVID pass? The basic idea is that people who are immune to the coronavirus can come into close contact with each other without catching the virus or spreading it. We don't have any easy way to measure immunity though, so COVID passes are intended to act as a bureaucratic, in brackets, proxy, providing evidence that someone has had an approved vaccine. Many passes can also be obtained on the basis of a positive COVID-19 test in the past 6 months or so, suggesting that a person has natural immunity. For people who haven't been vaccinated or infected naturally, a lot of schemes will also provide a short-term pass on the basis of a negative test in the past day or two to show that an individual isn't currently infected. Start shedding virus at 12 to 24 hours, reach peak viral shedding at 36 hours, don't get any symptoms for 3 to 5 days. I think the idea of a COVID passport is absolute fairy floss built out of bullshit. It's just not going to work, little bird. It is not going to work. Too many ways to fake it. Too many ways for anti-vaxxers to get themselves a fake passport. Too many loopholes in the assumptions. The idea that, oh, somebody had COVID within 6 months, therefore they must be immune. Somebody gets a negative test result here and now today, so we're going to assume that they haven't picked up the virus 2 days ago and they're shedding it, and the test is going to take 3 days to give us a result, or we've got an unreliable fast test that nobody can trust. I think COVID passports, it's a phenomenon created by the business as usual lobby from the Chamber of the Horrors of Commerce, desperately clutching at straws in an attempt to preserve their busyness models and their profit forecasts. It's not going to stop people from transmitting the virus. The way to stop people from transmitting the virus, it's not even vaccines, because there's such a great big fucking hole in the vaccine's ability to prevent people catching it, and then once they've caught it, to prevent people from transmitting it. The way to stop people from transmitting the virus is to make them get the best mask they can afford or they can access, and then teach them to wear the mask properly. Stop these dopey pricks from having the mask under their nose. Smack them on the hand every time they start groping and fondling and petting and tickling the bloody mask. There's no point having a really good mask if you don't wear it properly. We've got to educate the population on how to wear protective personal equipment. And so far there has been absolutely zero effort put into that by any public health administration anywhere in the world that I've become aware of. Oh, yeah, you've got to have a mask. You've got to wear a mask in public. Oh, it doesn't matter what sort of mask. Yeah, you can have a cloth mask. Oh, you can wrap a bandana around your face. You can have a surgical mask. You can have a decorative mask. Because nobody wants to tell the mass population, you've got to go out there and pay for an N95 P2 barrier nursing infection control mask. And then you've got to wear it properly. This is what we're not telling people. Don't know why. It's not as if it's a difficult message to get your head around, but it's not something that we're doing. To give you a bit of an idea of the confusion that's rampant at the moment, Place, European Union, scheme, EU digital COVID certificate, requirements, vaccination, recent negative test, or recovered from COVID-19 in the past 180 days. What's it for? Travel within the EU and to some other countries. France, pass sanitaire, vaccination, negative test in the past 3 days, or recovered from COVID-19 in the past 180 days. What's it for? Mandatory for restaurants, shops, hospitals, and long-distance trains. Italy, green pass, vaccination, negative test in past 3 days, or recovered from COVID-19 in the past 180 days. What's it for? Required in most public venues except shops. England, NHS COVID pass. Requirements, vaccination, positive PCR, polymerase chain reaction, test in the past 6 months, or, domestic only, a negative test in the past 48 hours. What's it for? International travel. Some venues may ask for it. Wales, NHS COVID pass. Requirements, vaccination. What's it for? International travel. Scotland, coronavirus vaccination status. Requirements, vaccination. What's it for? International travel. Northern Ireland, COVID certificate, vaccination, international travel. All of those that require vaccination, they've got a 40% hole in it. New York City, it's called a key to NYC. You've got to have at least one vaccine dose, so it's got a 60% hole in it. What's it for? From September, mandatory for indoor public activities such as restaurants and theatres. New York State, it's called an Excelsior Pass. You've got to be vaccinated or have a recent negative test. Some state employees must have one. Businesses can choose to require it. Israel, they want you to have a green pass. You've got to be vaccinated, have a negative test paid for privately in the past 72 hours, or you've got to be recovered from COVID-19. So poor people can't get one of them. All venues except shops and malls. In China, you've got to have a green, yellow, or red health code indicating the risk level based on a health survey early in the pandemic, but now also takes account of vaccination or recent negative test. Not mandatory, but green codes are required by most workplaces, restaurants, shops, gyms, and transport systems. So you've got a potpourri of optimistic hopefulness from the Chamber of Commerce. Same magazine, 28th of August, how vaccines are holding up against Delta. 2 doses of either the Pfizer-BioNTech or the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine provide good protection against symptomatic infections by the Delta coronavirus variant, but both are around 15% less effective against Delta than the Alpha variant, according to a large study in the UK. The findings show that protection wanes over time and imply that vaccinated people who get infected might be just as infectious as unvaccinated people. Vaccinated people who get infected might be just as infectious as unvaccinated people. The key message is that it is important to get both vaccine doses, says study leader Sarah Walker at the University of Oxford, UK. Quote, 2 doses are always better than 1, unquote. It was previously established that vaccines provide less protection against Delta than Alpha, but by how much has been debated. The UK study is based on a weekly survey that started in April 2020, since Delta became dominant in the UK. The team has received results from 800,000 PCR tests done on 360,000 individuals. Overall, after 2 doses, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine provides 84% protection against symptomatic infections by Delta, compared with 97% for Alpha, the study found. For Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, it is 71% compared with 87%. Both vaccines are less effective in older age groups against both variants. The findings also show that the effectiveness of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine wanes much faster than that of the Oxford-AstraZeneca one, by about a fifth every month after the second dose. Does that mean that the effectiveness is 1/5 less effective in one vaccine than the other, or that the less effective vaccine drops by 20% per month? Don't know. Ambiguous. The researchers think the protection from both vaccines will start to become similar after 4 or 5 months. That is an extrapolation, Walker cautions, as so far the team only has data going up to 80 days after 2 doses. The results of the PCR tests also suggest that individuals who get infected by Delta, despite being vaccinated, produce just as much of the virus as people who are unvaccinated. By contrast, vaccinated individuals infected with the Alpha variant usually had much lower virus levels than unvaccinated people. The implication is that vaccinated individuals who get infected might be just as infectious as unvaccinated people, but it isn't possible to be certain about this, says team member Cohen Puells, because the PCR tests might be detecting dead viruses rather than infectious ones. There's a lot to think about, isn't there? And there's yet one more magazine to go. 4th of September, the most recently read in my household anyway. Where did COVID-19 come from? The Bat Eaters lament virus came from the entrepreneurs who went out and put the bats under stress and then handled them. That's where it come from. That's my personal conclusion. Now let's see what the magazine has to say. Scientists call for urgent investigation into the coronavirus's probable origin in animals. The window of opportunity to establish the origins of SARS-CoV-2 will close within months if action isn't taken soon, warned scientists tasked by the World Health Organization, WHO, to discover how the virus emerged. In a wide-ranging comment article in the journal Nature, the team calls for a second phase of origin studies to start urgently and asks for renewed focus on an animal origin of the virus rather than a leak from a laboratory. The group also defended its work, which in March concluded that a lab leak was, quote, extremely unlikely, unquote, but has received criticism from some governments and commentators. Quote, we wrote the article because the clock is ticking and time is passing, unquote, says Marion Koopmans at the Erasmus University Medical Centre in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, who was part of the team that visited Wuhan in China in January to explore the origins of the virus. Quote, we feel a sense of urgency is missing, unquote. Waning COVID-19 antibodies in the first people infected by the virus and the culling of animals at Chinese wildlife farms are two reasons why, quote, the window is rapidly closing on the biological feasibility, unquote, of tracing the virus back to where it started, the group says. Asked how long it remains to identify the virus's origin, Koopmans says it is a matter of months, not years. The article comes after the World Health Organization director, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, called in July for a second phase of studies into the virus's origins, including an audit of processes at laboratories such as the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which researches coronaviruses. The Chinese government rejected the proposal, claiming it showed, quote, arrogance towards science, unquote. A separate report by the US intelligence, lack of intelligence community, the people who couldn't foresee that Kabul was about to fall, the people who didn't expect Vietnam to fall, the people who thought they could win in Iraq and Syria and Libya, the people who've never been right about anything since the OSS became the CIA. A separate report by the US unintelligence on the origins of COVID-19, which was requested by US President Joe Biden and ordered to explore the possibility of a lab leak, was published last week. The report was inconclusive, with unintelligence agencies divided on the most likely origin of COVID-19. Why the fuck would you get spies to try and figure out where a virus came from? You get virologists to figure out where a virus came from. You get epidemiologists to figure out where an epidemic started. You get spies to tell you bullshit so that you'll give them more money next week to worry about what they want to be worried about the following week after that. Koopman says the spotlight must be put back on what the team concluded is SARS-CoV-2's most likely origin, an animal virus moving into humans through direct contact or an intermediary, either at the Huanan seafood market in Wuhan or at another step of the wildlife trade. Like perhaps when you're extracting the bats from the fine mesh fish net that you strung across the bat cave so you could catch them by the hundreds or the tens of thousands so you could then take them away and sell them to the butchers in the wet market. Because the Chinese like to see their food killed. The group feels that discussions by World Health Organization member states regarding the first report are taking too long and are too narrowly focused on the lab leak hypothesis. Hypothesis means a potential explanation for an anomaly. The way the scientific method of problem solving works is first you notice something that's unusual, and then you formulate an hypothesis which might explain it. And, as it says in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the possible number of hypotheses available to explain any given observation or anomaly is officially infinite. The only way you can get from becoming an hypothesis to a theory is if you can make a testable prediction with that hypothesis. If you can't test the hypothesis, it remains a hypothesis, which is basically a polite word for a brain fart, something you plucked out of your ass forever. You don't get to be a theory unless you can make a prediction which can be tested, and then the results have to be replicatable. The group feels that discussions by World Health Organization member states regarding the first report are taking too long and are too narrowly focused on the lab leak hypothesis brain fart. We should not lose sight of the other hypothesis, which we have concluded is the most likely. In other words, the idea that it came from bats to humans via entrepreneurial get-rich-quick merchants, that's the hypothesis which meets Occam's razor, the one where you refrain from invoking entities unnecessarily. I think that was what William of Ockham said. Don't invent complicated conspiracy theories. Go with the simplest explanation. The money-grubbing, fat cat, trendy, greedy buggers went out there and stressed out the bats, and the bats got sick. And when the bats got sick, the commensal virus they'd had for 10,000 years bred up and made the jump to the new host species, which might have been pangolins and might have been straight to humans. I think the evidence indicates it went to pangolins and then to humans. We should not lose sight of the other hypothesis, which we have concluded is the most likely, says Koopmans. A paper published in July strengthened the case for the animal origin. The team also says that no data supporting a lab leak hypothesis has yet been submitted to the World Health Organization, despite repeated calls for it. A researcher who has spoken with the authors of the Nature article but wishes to remain anonymous says that one reason for the article was that the team members felt they needed to defend their reputations, and also because they felt sidelined by Gebra Yes's focus on lab leaks. Gebra Yes, he was the wanker who said that it wasn't transmissible from human to human. He was the wanker who said that it wasn't airborne. He was the wanker who said that it wasn't a pandemic. I think Gebra Yes is a less than reliable source of information. The article goes on to suggest that the World Health Organization's goalpost shifted during the initial inquiry. For example, the World Health Organization's original terms of reference did not include asking Chinese researchers to hand over raw patient data. The World Health Organization requested the data while the first phase of the inquiry was underway. The article states that the researchers in China are, quote, reluctant, unquote, to share the raw data on 174 COVID-19 patients identified in December 2019 because of patient confidentiality. Quote, it's easier said than done, unquote, says Koopmans. restricted access. The team has set out six priorities for the next phase of studies into the origins of SARS-CoV-2, including looking for further human COVID-19 cases from late 2019. Following the ease with which COVID-19 circulated in farmed mink in Denmark, the team also wants to see surveys on possible COVID-19 hosts or intermediaries, including wild bats and high-risk farmed animals such as badgers and civet cats. Chris Bayer at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, who is not part of the inquiry, says, quote, "Their first message is they acknowledge that they have not had access to all the data, to the earliest clinical cases, to all the animal data, and that's critically important," unquote. At the start of the 2003 SARS epidemic, sudden acute respiratory syndrome, when it was clear that the virus involved the wildlife trade and mixing of species that would not normally encounter each other in nature, China's government was unwilling to release data. Quote, "China took 2 years to release the first 50 people's data," unquote, says Bayer. Quote, "The Nature article implies that China has not been fully cooperative in terms of being transparent with the probe," quote, in quote, says Yang Zong Huang at the Council of Foreign Relations, a think tank based in New York City. Quote, "I think it will have an impact, through the strong message on the urgency of conducting phase 2 of the investigation," unquote. The Biden administration is supportive of a second phase. The World Health Organization commented on the Nature article, saying in a statement, quote, "They have done important work before and during their mission to Wuhan to advance our knowledge on the origin, and their work will be valuable for the next steps in looking for the origin of the virus," unquote. A conflict of interest statement accompanying the article notes that one of the authors, Peter Zak at Eco Health Alliance in New York City, has previously conducted studies with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the facility at the centre of the lab leak hypothesis. The paper is written solely by the inquiry's 11 external scientists. That does not include Peter Ben Mbarek at the World Health Organization, who has worked on the inquiry and fronted a February press conference on the team's initial findings. Quote, "It's not a sign of disagreement," unquote, says Koopmans of his omission. David Heyman at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who led the World Health Organization response to SARS in 2003, says he hopes scientists in and outside China will continue to work together, though it remains unclear if the virus's source can be found at this stage. Quote, "The collaboration that has been started has been really important," unquote, he says. Okay, and now I have a battery warning on my hard-pressed little mobile phone. My conclusions, my bottom line, my best guesstimate is that the vaccines are going to work pretty well for a while, but you're probably going to have to keep getting boosters. And I don't know what the virus is going to do, but what I expect it'll do is continue to become more transmissible. And I don't think the virus really cares how much damage it does to the hyaline membrane of the human lung or to the mucous membrane of the upper respiratory tract while it is becoming more transmissible. As far as I can see, what the virus wants to do is rapidly infect a human host, replicate, and move on. And anything that it can do to mutate, or any mutation which enables it to do that, because the virus hasn't got a brain, it's not as if it's thinking this shit out. It's just throwing the dice millions of times in each infected host. And like it said in one of those articles, any mutation that fails to assist the virus to replicate and move on, that mutation dies out. Any mutation which assists the virus, that mutation breeds faster than all the other viruses in the community, and a different variant takes over. How much stress the human economy can cope with the lockdowns which are required in order to try and halt the outbreaks, it's a debatable point. Nobody really knows. how compliant the human population is going to remain for government regulations and declarations that, you know, all of these people over here and got to lock themselves down, and no, you can't cross the border unless you've had a negative test within 3 days. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of people who didn't finish high school. They never studied biology. They don't understand any of this shit. And as far as they're concerned, it's much more attractive to claim that it's all bullshit. To pretend that somewhere there's a cabal of wicked, evil bastards who just want to put a crimp on middle class, ordinary working people. There are people, good people, well-meaning people who have never had much to do with doctors and nurses and scientists, but in their level of the economy and the community and the society, they're quite used to people who make a living by telling bullshit, self-serving bullshit. You know, vast chunks of the community are like that. You know, insurance salesmen, car salesmen, preachers, people who'll stand up there and tell you that they've got a direct personal line to the creator God theory of the universe, and you have to listen to them, you have to believe them, and donate, pretty please. People who buy shitty old cars cheap, give them a coat of paint, sell them to some unsuspecting sucker with a gearbox full of banana skins to stop them making horrible noises. Those sort of people and their victims, they're absolutely perfectly primed to believe a conspiracy theory to the effect that, oh, well, you know, like the big pharmaceutical companies have deliberately engineered the vaccination to only deal with the symptoms of the disease and not to actually kill the virus. I had a bloke try to tell me that in the comments thread yesterday. No. You can't design a vaccine to only deal with the symptoms and have no effect on transmissibility. They design a vaccine to attempt to educate the human immune system to the presence of the virus when there's only a few viruses in the human system. The idea is to get the human immune system to rapidly produce antibodies while there's only a few viruses around, so you can mop up the few viruses before they have a chance to get into cells and replicate and kill the cells and then get into the bloodstream so that they can then migrate to the cells on the surface of the mucous membrane and then be breathed out. The people who are inventing and developing and researching and tweaking the vaccines, they know about this shit because they've spent years, decades studying it and practicing it. I'm a time expired registered general nurse. I don't know how to make a vaccine. What I do know is that the people who are in that game are not the bean counters and the accountants who are running the balance sheet side of the pharmaceutical company. I'm sure there are millions of dollars being skimmed at some level by the bureaucratic microbes and the bean counters. But the research scientists are not the bean counters. The research scientists, they work for the kudos of having their work recognised as being clever by their companions, by their competitors. They work for the fun of everybody recognising that they're a clever bugger who did a good job. They grew up wanting to save the bloody world, and they're trying their best, and the trouble is, something like 30 or 40% of the world isn't interested. They don't know, they don't care, they don't want to know, they just want to go back to trying to make money. And the bottom line is, the rest of the biosphere is bloody sick of humans trying to make money. The rest of the biosphere wants to do something to cull humanity. The rest of the biosphere wants humanity to become a rare and threatened species. The rest of the biosphere doesn't like the idea that 96% of the vertebral biomass is humans, our pets, and our livestock. So we have the Bat Eaters Lament viruses from Marburg, Ebola, SARS, MERS, Middle East Respiratory Virus, Hendra, Horse Kisses virus, and now SARS-CoV-2. And we are being beaten by the virus because of dickheads who prioritise their busyness plan. Oh, I've lost so much money since the virus. No, they haven't lost any money at all because they never had the money. All they had was an expectation of trading, an expectation of turnover, an expectation of skimming a profit off the turnover resulting from the trade, and the environment has changed and that trade has not occurred. They haven't lost anything at all except their own expectations of becoming rich one day. And there's only 18 minutes left on this card, so I'll tell you what, this can be the end of the video, eh? Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Much ado about coronavirus vaccines. Get one, bugger the Zoom button. Get one, get two, get a booster. Get them while you can. It won't stop you from giving the virus to somebody else unless you wear a really good mask and wear it properly. But if you do get the vaccine, it'll probably stop you from going to intensive care. And even if you do have to go to intensive care, it'll probably stop you from dying while you are there. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Finally, and at long length, ciao.